Hey there, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments.
I always hated birthdays, and not because of age or candles or that awful off-key family singing, but because they never felt like they were mine. Not really, even when I turned 10, and my mom got me a bike I never asked for. She slapped Emily's name on the card too, saying, "You can both ride it, Rachel, share like good sisters." Emily was 4 at the time, couldn't even keep her balance on the damn thing. But that was the theme, wasn't it? Sharing what was mine, because God forbid the golden child ever felt left out. So when I woke up that morning, my 35th birthday, and heard the clatter of plates and the scent of coffee and sugar in the air, I already knew it wasn't going to be about me. I came downstairs in sweats and a tank top, hair still damp from the shower, expecting maybe a quiet breakfast or just a happy birthday, mumbled through a newspaper. But there she was, my mother, standing at the kitchen island with a big-ass grin on her face, holding a cake decorated with pink frosting and glittery letters. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, this year was different. But no, of course not. The cake read, "Happy birthday, Rachel, and happy half-birthday, Emily." 2 names, 1 cake, 1 birthday, hijacked again. She said it like it was the most charming, cheerful thing. "It's Emily's half-birthday today too, remember?" As if that was some sacred tradition instead of a made-up excuse to shift the spotlight. And just like that, the air got tight. My shoulders stiffened. I gave a weak smile, the kind I'd perfected over 3 decades. I nodded, didn't argue, didn't scream. I'd done enough of that over the years. No one ever listened anyway. That's when I handed my father the folder. He was halfway into his first cup of coffee, still in his robe, glasses perched low on his nose, looking like a man who'd long ago surrendered to the rhythms of a woman who never really loved him. I placed it right in front of his plate, not saying a word. He looked down at it, then up at me, confused, blinking like he hadn't had his first full thought of the day yet. "What's this?" he asked, brows furrowed. I didn't blink. "Proof I bought your house 2 weeks ago." For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. Not even Emily, who had just strolled in wearing an oversized hoodie and no pants, yawning like a princess freshly woken from a luxurious nap. My dad's hand froze mid-reach. My mom's mouth opened, but nothing came out. And me? I just stood there, holding my coffee cup like it was the only thing tethering me to earth. He opened the folder slowly, like it might explode. Inside was a receipt, legal paperwork, transfer of ownership, deed, all signed, all finalized, 2 weeks ago. While they were up north visiting Emily at some wellness retreat she desperately needed, after exhausting herself painting watercolors for her Instagram followers, I was sitting across from a notary and a real estate attorney making sure every I was dotted. My dad's face went pale. He stared at the document like it was written in another language. This can't be right," he muttered, shaking his head. "We never agreed to sell." And now maybe you're wondering the same thing. Maybe you're asking yourself, how the hell did she manage that? What kind of daughter does something like that to her parents? On her own birthday, no less. But let me ask you this. Have you ever felt so consistently forgotten, so systemically ignored, that you had to burn the whole damn house down, metaphorically or otherwise, just to hear someone say your name without it being an afterthought? Because I didn't do this out of spite, not entirely. I did it because they taught me over and over that being polite gets you passed over, that waiting your turn only means someone else gets a second helping before you've had your first. I bought the house because I could, because the one thing they never paid attention to was the fact that I'd done just fine without them. I built a career in tech, while Emily sold finger paintings on Etsy. I paid off student loans while they paid for her rehab, twice. I owned my condo, leased my car, filed my taxes early, and never once asked them for a thing. But Emily, she could sneeze and my mother would knit her a scarf and throw a fundraiser for her tissues. So when the opportunity came, I took it. Legally, cleverly, quietly. Frank, my father, had co-signed the original loan when they bought the house in the 80s. When my mother refinanced in his name without updating the title, I found the leverage, a loophole, an old debt, finally working in my favor. And the best part? They never saw it coming because they never looked at me long enough to notice anything. Emily broke the silence first. Wait, you what? Are you serious? You can't do that, Rachel. I turned to her, all smiles now, the fake kind she always gave me. Sure I can, and I did. Happy half birthday, Em. And in that moment, I didn't feel cruel. I felt whole. Like maybe for once I wasn't the extra name on someone else's cake. Like maybe I'd finally learned how to take something back. Now tell me honestly, what would you have done? Would you have smiled and let them cut you another shared slice of cake? Or would you have handed them the folder? Because this wasn't revenge. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't just sit in the room. It crawls up the walls, gets into your skin, and settles deep into your spine like ice water trickling slowly down your back. And as my father stared down at those papers, as if they'd been handed to him by a ghost rather than his oldest daughter, I felt the weight of the moment stretch out like a rubber band pulled too far, ready to snap, while my mother, still clutching that ridiculous cake like it was some sacred relic, stood frozen with a plastered smile that looked less like joy and more like the face of someone who's been caught red-handed in a crime they thought they buried 30 years ago. He read each page slowly, his finger tracing the legal text, as if searching for a typo or a sign that it was some elaborate prank. Something he could brush off with a weak chuckle and a return to routine. But when he reached the line with his own signature, a scan from a refinancing form she'd submitted years ago without updating the joint ownership, his face sank. Not with anger, but with the slow, humiliating realization that the foundations of his quiet, passive life had been built on paper walls, and now one good gust had torn them down. Rachel, he said finally, voice low and hollow like the last breath before a storm. Why would you do this? And that was the question, wasn't it? The one they'd never asked when they skipped me for family vacations, or when they sold my childhood bed to make space for Emily's easel, and then told me to sleep on the couch like it was some kind of summer camp adventure. They never asked why I moved across the country for college, or why I didn't come home for Thanksgiving 3 years in a row, or why I never told them I'd bought my own place at 27 while they were still giving Emily grocery money like she was 12 and helpless. No, they never asked why I did anything, until I did something they couldn't ignore. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms with the kind of composure that only comes after a lifetime of biting your tongue so hard it almost splits, and said, because for 35 years, I've been watching this family bend itself backwards for one person while the rest of us were told to be understanding, to be patient, to wait our turn. My turn never came, Dad, so I made one. Mom finally found her voice. And of course it wasn't calm or gentle. It was sharp and dismissive, the way she always got when control started to slip through her fingers. This is ridiculous, Rachel. This is your home too. Why would you go behind our backs like that? You don't even live here. And that's when I laughed. Not loud, not bitter, but just enough to let the taste of the irony sit in my mouth like burnt coffee. Exactly, I don't live here. I haven't in over 15 years. Because when I was 19, you told me it was time to make space. Remember? Emily needed a quiet place to explore her creative side. So I packed up my things and left, and you boxed up my room before I even crossed the state line. Emily, still rubbing sleep from her eyes, now fully caught up in the moment, squinted at me like I was speaking a foreign language. What are you even talking about? Why are you being so dramatic? She always had that talent. Making my pain feel like a performance, like I was putting on a show just to ruin her day. And I used to let her. I used to believe maybe I was overreacting, that maybe I needed to grow thicker skin or smile more or just let it go. But not anymore. You remember that credit card you opened in Mom and Dad's name? I asked, voice casual, almost conversational, like I was asking about the weather. The one you used to buy your studio furniture? I saw the bills. They're still coming. You think they're going to pay those forever? That did it. Her face dropped. and my mother's hand flew to her chest in that dramatic way she does when she's pretending to be shocked by something she always secretly knew. "Emily, please tell me that's not true." Emily stammered, her voice brittle. I was going to pay them back, eventually." Dad looked up from the paperwork, eyes wide and glassy, but I didn't give him time to spiral. "That house, it's not just mine legally now, it's mine entirely. And you're all welcome to stay, of course. Rent's fair, first and last month due up front." The room cracked open then, not with shouting, not with breaking glass or slammed doors, but with the sickening sound of reality setting in, of years of blind indulgence folding under the weight of truth. My father said nothing. He just looked at me like he didn't know who I was. My mother sputtered something about betrayal, about family, about obligations and loyalty, but all I heard was noise. All I saw were the same tired scripts replaying on a loop. Then Emily, never one to go down quietly, stepped forward, her voice climbing. "You can't just throw us out. This is my home too. You're not seriously evicting us, Rachel." I smiled, and not the fake, tired smile they'd taught me to wear, but something smaller and truer. "I'm not throwing you out, Em. I'm giving you 30 days. Consider it your birthday present." And with that, I picked up my coffee, now gone cold, and left the kitchen. I could hear them still, my mom snapping at my dad, Emily whining about lawyers, the sound of denial taking its first deep breath. But I didn't stop. I went back upstairs, shut my door, and exhaled like I hadn't in years. This wasn't about the house. It was never about the house. It was about finally getting a seat at the table, even if I had to build the damn table myself. And still, I wasn't done, not by a long shot. The attic hadn't changed since the day I left, which in a way was comforting and insulting at the same time. Like finding an old diary shoved in the back of a drawer, untouched and unread, waiting quietly while everyone around it moved on without a backward glance. The same squeaky wood planks groaned beneath my feet, the same musty scent of forgotten furniture and mothballed holiday decorations clung to the air, and as I moved boxes around with slow, deliberate purpose, I found myself swallowing down a cocktail of nostalgia and resentment that hit harder with each layer of dust. I brushed off old family relics that no one had bothered to look at in over a decade. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, not really, but part of me knew there was more in this house than just bad memories and pastel lies baked into frosting and traditions no one asked for. What caught my eye first was a stack of photo albums, still labeled in my mother's handwriting, that tight, perfect cursive she'd always been so proud of, as if neat letters somehow equaled good parenting. There was an album for Emily, ages 1 to 5, another for Emily's School, Plays and Art Shows, and even one titled Emily Just Because, stuffed so full it barely closed. Mine? There was one, singular, simply marked, Rachel Early Years. It barely made it past my 8th birthday. After that, it was as if I'd faded into the wallpaper, just another piece of the house, useful when needed, otherwise ignored. I didn't cry, I didn't even feel sad. I just closed the album, placed it back where I found it, and kept moving. That's when I found the briefcase. It was old, leather, cracked, with tarnished brass clasps that clicked open with surprising ease. It wasn't hidden, not really, just buried under layers of neglect, stacked beneath a box of Christmas lights and a few of Emily's participation trophies. Inside were papers, folders, some tax documents, a few old bills, and at the bottom, a sealed manila envelope with my father's name written in thick black ink. Frank Morgan. The handwriting wasn't my mother's. It was blocky, uneven. It looked like something he'd scrawled in a hurry, perhaps late at night, maybe when no one else was around to ask questions. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear anything, already sensing this wasn't something I was supposed to see. Inside were letters, copies of emails printed out, receipts from a bank I didn't recognize, and a birth certificate. Not mine, not Emily's. A boy. Name, Matthew Charles Bennett. Father, Frank Morgan. No mother listed. The date? 1995. Which meant this boy, this Matthew, would be about 30 now. I stared at the name for a long time, feeling the room shift beneath me, not dramatically, not like an earthquake, but like a slow sinkhole opening under everything I thought I knew. My father had a son I never knew existed, a son he had before, or maybe during, his marriage to my mother, and judging by the dates and the care he took to store these documents, this wasn't some fling or one-night mistake. This was someone he knew, someone he supported. There were money transfers, monthly, labeled simply Matthew's Fund, stretching all the way up to last year. My hands were trembling, but not with anger, at least not yet. It was confusion first, then realization, then a kind of bitter clarity that made my throat dry and my stomach churn. This house, this family, this narrative my mother had pushed our whole lives, it was a facade, a performance. And I started to understand why my father had looked at me the way he did. When I handed him the folder, that wasn't just shock. That was fear, not of losing the house, but of the secrets buried within it finally coming to the surface. I sat down, right there on the attic floor, surrounded by dusty boxes and 30 years of misplaced love, and I read every single document. By the time I was done, I knew one thing for sure. My father wasn't the enemy. He was a man trapped in a life that had been written for him by someone else. Someone who smiled too brightly at birthday cakes and clutched pearls over betrayals, while quietly building a kingdom on manipulation and silence. That evening, when the sun dipped low and cast long, honey-colored shadows through the upstairs hallway, I found my father sitting in his recliner, TV on but muted. Eyes blank and glassy, I sat across from him, held up the birth certificate, and waited. He didn't flinch, didn't ask what it was, he just looked at me, jaw tight, and after a moment said quietly, "You weren't supposed to find that." I didn't ask the obvious questions. I didn't demand explanations or scream about lies. I simply said, "Why didn't you ever tell me I had a brother?" His eyes dropped to the floor. "Because your mother made it clear there was no space for that part of my life. And I wasn't strong enough to fight her." There it was, the truth, spoken not with defiance or guilt, but with resignation. He wasn't proud, he wasn't apologizing, he was just tired, and I understood. I didn't forgive him, not yet, but I understood. I stood, left the envelope on the coffee table, and before walking away said, "He deserves to know you exist, and you deserve to decide if that matters." That night, I sat in my old bedroom, surrounded by bare walls and forgotten boxes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the overlooked child in someone else's story. I felt like the author. And the next chapter? It was going to be brutal. The invitation was subtle, not dramatic, not draped in vengeance or made for spectacle, but designed with precision, as if I were orchestrating not just an event, but an unraveling, a slow-burning exposure of all the carefully curated lies my family had wrapped themselves in like antique quilts passed down through generations without ever checking for the rot beneath the seams. I called it a housewarming, though the warmth was a lie, just like the name on the deed used to be, and I made sure to keep the guest list short and intentional. No neighbors, no distant relatives, just the people who needed to see and hear what I was about to unfold, and one special guest whose name I didn't mention to anyone, because sometimes the most important ingredients in a reckoning are the ones that come in quiet. Alex, my best friend since college, and the only person who knew everything from day one, showed up first, holding a bottle of overpriced wine and wearing a grin that barely masked her curiosity. Because she knew me well enough to sense that this wasn't just a gathering, that this was me lighting the fuse on something long buried. She wandered through the house with raised eyebrows, admiring the new paint in the hallway, the fixed porch swing, and the subtle rearrangement of furniture that made the place feel less like the stage my mother had ruled from, and more like neutral ground awaiting judgment. "This feels different," she said, and I nodded, replying only, "It should." My parents arrived together, Frank driving, Diane in the passenger seat, lips pursed and posture too straight, like she'd spent the entire ride coaching herself into grace, practicing lines about forgiveness and family and misunderstanding. She brought a tray of hors d'oeuvres, as if mini quiches could undo 3 decades of favoritism in silence, and handed them to me with a brittle smile. "I figured you might be too busy to cook," she said, as if I hadn't hosted full Thanksgiving dinners for my own friends for years, while she sent Emily grocery gift cards and half-hearted texts. Emily was last, as always, making an entrance that demanded acknowledgement without effort, her oversized sunglasses still on, though the sun was already low, and her hair piled into one of those messy buns that cost more in salon visits than most people spend on rent. She hugged my mother, nodded coolly at my father, and barely glanced at me before muttering, "Cute house, very you." I didn't rise to the bait. I didn't need to. We gathered in the living room, people sipping wine and picking at the food, making that uncomfortable small talk families do when the real topic is hanging heavy in the air, unspoken but not unseen. I waited until everyone had settled, until Diane had begun telling Alex a sanitized version of our quirky family traditions. And then I stood, holding up my glass, and said in a tone calm enough to be terrifying, "I just want to say thank you for coming. It means a lot to me that we can all be here, in this house, my house, as a family." There was a pause. My mother blinked. My father stared into his glass. Emily snorted, and Alex, God bless her, sipped slowly and leaned back like she was watching the first act of a long-anticipated play. And then the doorbell rang. Everyone turned, but I was already moving. I opened the door and stepped aside to let him in. Matthew, tall, quiet, with the kind of nervous energy that comes from being summoned into a stranger's life with no warning. I had found him through a few digital breadcrumbs, bank statements, alumni records, social media accounts where he posted maybe twice a year, mostly about work and bad weather, and I hadn't messaged him with drama or pity. Just a sentence. "Your father's name is Frank Morgan. He's alive. He wants to meet you. Come to this address." And he did. The moment my father saw him, something cracked. Not loudly, not visibly, but in a way that shifted the entire temperature of the room. Diane rose slowly, mouth parting in disbelief, voice soft with rehearsed innocence. "Who is this?" Matthew looked at me. I nodded. He turned to her and said, "I'm Frank's son. I think we need to talk." She paled. My father stood. Emily swore under her breath. What followed wasn't a scream fest. It wasn't melodrama. It was far worse. It was calm, honest, and unignorable. I let Matthew tell his story. About the letters he got once a year on his birthday from a man he never met. About the quiet monthly deposits that stopped without explanation. About growing up always feeling like someone was watching from a distance, but too afraid to step forward. My father didn't interrupt. My mother did, of course, offering flat denials and vague recollections of that time Frank had a breakdown or a misunderstanding from before we were serious, but no one was buying it, especially not me. And then I gave my toast. "To family secrets," I said, lifting my glass again. "And to the strange freedom that comes from airing them out, even when they sting. This house has seen too many lies to survive another one. So tonight we clean it out, truth by truth, name by name." Emily stood then, face twisted with rage, wineglass abandoned on the table. "You're disgusting," she hissed. "Dragging this out for attention, bringing strangers into our home. You always wanted to ruin everything." I didn't flinch. "Strangers? You mean your half-brother? Or do you mean the credit collector who will be knocking on your door next week when Mom and Dad stop covering your debts?" She froze. I turned to Diane. "Did you really think I didn't see the second mortgage? The emergency loan in Frank's name that you used to help Emily find herself in Sedona? That was the last straw." Diane stormed out, clutching her purse like a shield. Emily followed, sputtering threats about lawyers and rights and family unity. And my father, he just sat back down, rubbing his face with both hands like a man finally waking up. When it was over, Matthew stayed. He didn't ask for anything. He just sat beside Frank, the two of them saying little, but understanding more than words could carry. Alex leaned in, whispered, "That was intense." I smiled faintly. Yeah, but necessary. Because fire doesn't just destroy. Sometimes it purifies. And what remained was mine to rebuild. There was a stillness in the house the morning after that felt almost unnatural. Not the kind of silence that comes with peace or contentment, but the kind that follows a detonation when the smoke is still suspended in the air and all that remains is the quiet calculation of what exactly survived. I woke up earlier than usual, not out of habit or necessity, but because my mind wouldn't let me rest. Images of the previous night playing over and over in slow, silent frames, like someone had pulled the sound from a film and left only the raw visuals behind. My mother's face, contorted with betrayal, not because of what had been revealed, but because she had lost control. Emily's mouth frozen mid-insult, her mask slipping just enough to show the panic underneath. My father, small and weary, sitting beside the son he never thought he'd see again, looking both freed and defeated in the same breath. The kitchen was colder than usual, and as I wrapped my fingers around a chipped mug of coffee, I didn't reach for the sugar or cream. Just let it burn, black and bitter, because for once I didn't feel the need to sweeten something that had already been swallowed raw. The quiet was punctuated only by the soft creak of the floor above, as Frank moved around, his steps cautious, unsteady, like he too wasn't sure how to exist in a house that suddenly belonged to truth. I didn't speak to him right away. I gave him space, not because I was being kind, but because I understood now, with painful clarity, that even after everything, after the revelation of his secret son, after years of complicity in my mother's favoritism, after silently watching as I was made invisible, he was not a villain, not really. He was just a man who had lived too long in fear of confrontation, who had learned, probably early on, that survival in a marriage like Diane's meant choosing silence over resistance. I heard the front door open slowly around noon, and I didn't have to look to know who it was. Diane never said goodbye. She moved like someone escaping a crime scene, her car engine coughing to life before I even had a chance to peek through the curtain. There was no note, no voicemail, no dramatic confrontation this time, just absence, a void that was strangely louder than all the arguments we could have had. She had left behind her key on the counter, alongside an unopened letter addressed to Emily, and something about that, her reaching out to the daughter she'd used as both weapon and excuse, made my stomach turn more than any of her accusations from the night before. Emily didn't call. Not that day, not the next. I imagined her spiraling somewhere, dialing lawyers who told her there was nothing to contest, texting mutual acquaintances to spin the story in her favor, painting herself as the victim of a jealous sister with too much time and money. That was fine. Let her tell whatever version she needed to survive. I had no interest in dragging this out into a war. I'd already won, not because I had the house or the paperwork or the upper hand, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for anyone's permission to be angry or right or present. Matthew stayed for 2 days. He didn't ask for more. He didn't unpack or press for a reunion. We spoke only once, really, when he caught me outside by the garden pulling weeds with bare hands like I was trying to dig up something deeper than roots. He stood beside me for a moment, watched in silence, and then said, "He's not who I expected, but I'm glad I met him." I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything profound. "You did what I couldn't," he added. "You forced the truth out." Later that night, Frank knocked on my bedroom door, the one that used to be Emily's art studio, and then a storage room, and finally, in these last few days, a space where I could breathe without asking for it. He looked tired, older than I remembered, like the years had finally caught up with him once he stopped pretending they hadn't happened. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped between his knees, and stared at the floor for what felt like an eternity before finally whispering, I'm sorry, Rachel. Not just for this once, for everything, for not standing up for you, for watching and saying nothing. I didn't answer right away. I didn't rush to forgive. I just let the apology sit there, heavy and real. And after a long pause, I asked, "Why did you stay with her?" He looked up, eyes glassy, and replied, "Because I was afraid. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of starting over. Afraid she was right when she said no one else would put up with me." And there it was, the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. I didn't comfort him. I didn't tell him he was wrong. I just placed my hand over his, squeezed once, and let go. The next morning, he packed a small suitcase, left quietly, and said he'd be staying with a friend for a while. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't say when he'd be back, and somehow that was exactly what I needed. The house was quiet again, but different this time. Not empty, but open. I moved through it with a strange sense of ownership, not of property, but of self, like I had finally taken back something that had been slowly drained from me since childhood, and only now, after scorched earth and broken illusions, had begun to refill. I replaced the family portraits with my own photos, friends, travels, places I'd loved without them. I donated Emily's trophies. I burned the cake candles. One afternoon, while organizing the hall closet, I found a mirror I hadn't seen in years. One of those ornate gold-trimmed ones my mother used to obsess over polishing. I hung it near the front door without thinking, and later, walking past it, I caught my reflection and froze. It wasn't vanity that stopped me. It was recognition, because for a split second, I saw her, Diane, not in the flesh, but in the way my eyes narrowed, the way my mouth had set into a familiar, tight line, the way victory had etched itself into my posture like armor. And for the first time since this all began, I was afraid, not of her, not of what had happened, but of what I had become. Because the truth is, revenge, even the righteous kind, doesn't come without cost. It gives you power, yes, but it also carves something out of you in the process, replaces it with something colder, something harder to wash off. And standing there, staring at a face I no longer fully recognized, I had to ask myself the one question I hadn't dared until now. Did I finally become free? Or did I just become her? I still don't know. Maybe I never will. But I do know this. The house is mine now, and I sleep with the doors locked.